Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here, responding to the Standard Self-Assessment Report. We are so excited to learn with this community today. I am Samantha Weil, I use she, her pronouns, and I am SRE Network's Community Manager. We want to take a moment before we jump in to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to learn with us today, and to thank you for taking time to complete the standard self-assessment. It's really due to each of you taking the time to reflect and assess and be open and honest in your reports that we are able to learn so much in the report. So as a reminder, SRE Network is a Jewish network of 160 plus organizations rooted in a shared commitment to safety, respect, and equity for all. We're really thrilled to gather with our member organizations today. Thank you for being a member. The power of your membership is that you are a part of a larger movement united by shared goals and on a shared journey. Together, we connect, learn, and support each other. Our community is able to make impactful change, and together we make a powerful collective statement that we are committed to creating healthy workplaces and communal spaces for all. Thank you so much for being part of this work and this journey with us. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to introduce some of the fabulous SRE Network staff that's on the call with us today. They're going to wave hello as I introduce you to them, so hopefully you can put a face with a name for someone you've been emailing and know the people behind the screen who are always here waiting to support you. So first up is Shayna Wasserman, our Director of Strategic Operations. We then have Julian Felvinci, our Operations Assistant, Dr. Gila Ben Shmuel, our Senior Advisor, Archie Wilson, our Digital Communications Manager, and today we're also joined by one of our partners, Anna Marks, an evaluation and organizational change consultant, who was a tremendous help on the report and analyzing the data for us. A couple quick logistics. If you need closed captions during this session, please click the CC button. Today's presentation portion of the program is recorded, but we're going to pause the recording before we go into the more interactive breakouts and group discussions in order to foster a brave space where we can openly communicate and trust each other. So with that, let's talk about what we're going to do in the next hour. Julian, can you go to the agenda page? Thank you. So in the next hour, we're going to explore the findings of the standard self-assessment report, the common strengths we identified across the network, priority areas for improvement, and how we've grown on this journey. I invite you throughout this presentation to think about where does your organization fit into this larger network and this larger story that we're telling. We hope in some ways that it validates your journey to hear where other organizations are succeeding or struggling as well, and that you can identify some areas you might be able to learn from other organizations or where you can be a leader and share your successes and help teach others and bring them along the journey. We're going to talk more about your specific situations and what you can learn and where you fit in the second half of the program when we move to our breakout discussions on our 4 standards areas. But before we do that, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A to make sure that any questions you brought today have a chance to get answered. And then we'll end with a group discussion and share out, knowing that we can't, be in 4 different breakout rooms on 4 topics at once. So we'll have some time to learn about the takeaways from each of the discussions. So with that, let's dive into the standard self-assessment report. The standard self-assessment is an assessment that every member organization of SRE takes annually to assess their progress on their SRE journeys. As SRE member organizations, you are committed to being on a journey towards implementing the standards, but not necessarily arriving at the eventual location that we're all working towards. So it's really important that we assess progress, see how we've grown, determine priorities for future improvement through the practice of the standard self-assessment. Another important piece of this process is that it allows organizations to participate in an annual accountability process. And since leadership and accountability is one of our 4 standards areas and priorities, it's important that we are both accountable internally to ourselves as organizations, but also in this accountability relationship as a member organization to SRE Network. Julian, can you take us to the next page? So if you know one takeaway about the SRE, the SSA assessment report, it's that the story we found is SRE Network member organizations are successfully making gradual and steady progress along their journeys to building more safe, respectful, and equitable workplaces. And there's still more room for improvement. So we're excited to see that, we are moving in the right direction. Organizations are doing well and okay overall, and we're making incremental change and maintaining that progress year to year. And there's still more room for us to grow. It's similar if you read Leading Edge's report to the question, are Jewish nonprofits a great place to work? And what they found this year was, we're doing okay, but we're not yet there. And there's still work to do. So similar story, we're doing okay, and there's more work for us to do together to improve. Julian, can you go to the next one? So a quick overview of the data. We had two different versions of the standard self-assessment, one for large organizations, which are organizations with 6 or more staff, so take large as a relative term, and then for small organizations with 1 to 5 staff. And so since the, capacity and context of organizations are so different with smaller staffs, they take a condensed version of the assessment. For large organizations, that is the majority of the network. We had 107 organizations complete the standard self-assessment by October 1st. More have completed it since then, but that's when we paused to analyze the report. And what we found is the average score was 84%. So in terms of grading, we got a B. So we're doing well. We'd like to see us move into that A range, but a B is a good grade for now. I also want to share with you that in the standards, we have the 4 areas that are then assessed in the evaluation. So leadership and accountability, we found received the top average score, with them reporting and response, policies and guidelines, and education being at the lowest end. I want to take a moment and see how your organizations are doing. What did you identify as your organization's strengths? So Julian is going to trigger a quick Zoom poll so we can get a better sense of who's in the room, and does your story reflect the story of the larger network, or is it hearing something different? Great, so the results are coming in. We're going to share them on screen with you in just a moment. Thank you for taking this quick moment to fill it out. Great, Julian, I think you can pause and share the result with us, or end the poll and share the results. Great, so hopefully you can see the results. Similarly, leadership and accountability was identified as the top area, and then there wasn't, education and training, unlike the report for this group, is kind of the next area, but not by a significant difference between reporting response and policies and guidelines. So, as we identified, there's some areas we're doing a little bit better, but there is room for improvement in all of these different standards areas. Julian, can we go back to the presentation? And thank you, Julian, for running all of our tech today. So we can go to the next slide now. Small organizations, we also saw, are kind of at a similar point. They received an average score of 83%, and so a B grade overall. So what are our common strengths we're seeing across the network? As I mentioned, leadership and accountability and reporting and response are the 2 areas that rose to the top. And within those areas, we were excited to see that 90% of organizations are conducting a climate survey, which is a really important tool to being able to assess what is the experience of every employee on the ground, and being able to assess, where is there room for growth, and does the narrative that senior leadership understands of how the organization is doing reflect the experience of employees. And so that combined with the standard self-assessment tells a more full picture to help plan and chart where you need to improve on your SRE journeys and what you're doing really well and should continue doing. And then we were really excited to see that new this year is that a lot of organizations have established reporting and response processes. So 90% of organizations have accomplished that. I'd love for you to share in the chat if you are comfortable. What's a success you had this year or a strength that your organization is excited about? Love to take the opportunity to learn a little bit from the group that's in the room today. People are typing. Can we go on to the next slide? One strength and success I see is adopting our own version of a safety, respect, and equity policy. That's fantastic. Continuing ongoing training for staff is another strength and accomplishment. Thank you so much for sharing, and I encourage you to keep them coming in the chat so we can learn from each other today. So following where we're doing really well, we looked at where is there room to grow. And so education and training and policies and guidelines were the areas we identified that have the most room for growth. Specifically, now that organizations have more successfully established policies, reporting and response procedures, et cetera, the next step is to now communicate those to staff on a regular basis, make them more accessible. And then on the education and training side, there's an identified need for more in-depth and frequent trainings for staff. So I'm going to do a quick poll again and ask you to answer for us. Where is your organization's priorities for improvement? So I'll ask you to take this quick survey. So I'm going to share the results. One of the exciting things about meeting with different subsets of the network in today's session is getting to see how, everyone's at a different place on their journey. And so today's group is identifying that the priorities for improvement are in reporting and response and policies and guidelines. And there is some room for improvement in the other two areas as well. So it's interesting to see where your story may not necessarily be the trends of the overall network and are still a really important piece and a real reality for a lot of organizations, really bringing people together wherever you are in your journey to learn from and support each other. Julian, can we go to the next slide? So let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the common areas for growth. If you notice on this chart, 3 out of the 4 areas are about communicating policies and procedures on a regular basis and making them accessible. There's 2 other pieces that rise to the top. Once again, that need for education and training on both policies and reporting systems, as well as harassment prevention. And then the other area is that individuals who conduct investigations into discrimination and harassment need training to conduct those investigations. It's one of the lowest areas of where people are actually trained to do that. So we've identified that as yet another area for growth. Julian, can you go on to the next one? So some specific areas that we've identified that organizations need to invest in and address. So for education and training, we need to start with 1 training per year for organizations that aren't providing any trainings to their full staff yet. And for those who are providing at least 1 training a year, they've identified that that feels insufficient and that they'd like to develop and offer more trainings more frequently throughout the year about more in-depth topics and a wider variety of topics. For policies and guidelines, once again, that priority to improve communication to staff and making sure everyone is aware of the policies and procedures. And since the best practices are evolving, to continue updating their handbook. Best practices is usually to review and update about every year or every other year. For leadership and accountability, there's a need to foster further buy-in and commitment from lay leaders and boards to the work of SRE. And then when it comes to reporting and response, like we've said, there's the need to communicate the reporting and response procedures so everyone knows what to do if something happens. And then also to train the individuals who are responsible for conducting investigations. We'd love to hear from you if you're willing to share. What's a specific priority that your organization has identified that you're working to grow in or improve this year? So I welcome you to post that in the chat. I'm going to give folks a little bit to type. So we see one organization just updated their handbook, is now working on salary bands. That's fantastic. Providing more in-depth trainings for staff. Great, thank you for sharing. I encourage more folks to continue sharing, updating policies and regular communications, deepening ongoing education, updating policies as they go back to larger in-person community gatherings. Yes, something very real for many organizations this year. Getting more board member buy-in, more staff training, building out scaffolding of policies. So there's a lot of work we're doing, and we're so excited to hear, what it is that you're working on the ground. Julian, can you take us to the next page? So now that we've talked about, what we're doing well, where we have room to grow, let's talk a little bit about what we've accomplished in the last year and celebrate some successes. So we found that the network overall improved the most in policies and guidelines and reporting and response, which was exciting to see those two areas because there's a correlation between those areas and where SRE Network provided the most support in the past year. So if you're not aware yet, the Kayleen Policy Toolkit was launched by Sacred Spaces with guidance and funding from SRE Network, and is a really in-depth toolkit that helps organizations build out policies that reflect the best practices. And so we're excited to see that that correlates and connects with the improvement in policies and guidelines this past year. And if you haven't checked out the toolkit yet, I really encourage you to do so. And then reporting and response was the area where, one, there's a module of the Kayleen Policy Toolkit that specifically focuses on that. But we also had many of the SRE learning programs this year focus on reporting and response specifically. If you didn't access those resources, they're available on our website, and we have recordings of some of those sessions as well. Overall, we saw incremental changes. Some organizations made huge leaps in the last year, but most organizations honed in on one or two areas where they really wanted to improve, and a few practices, and improved in those areas. So we saw that 50% of organizations increased their score, and that 21% maintained their score. And we do want to celebrate that 21% as well, because 2021 was a year of a lot of disruption, from the COVID pandemic to the racial reckoning in this country, organizations being understaffed sometimes, having high staff turnover, and a real stretching of capacity of people. And so the fact that SRE remained a priority for organizations, and that we didn't see backsliding in that time, but they were able to maintain their progress and keep doing some of the new things that they had started, is a real achievement, and we want to celebrate that for organizations. So be curious, how has your organization improved in the last year? Is there a success or an improvement that you're really proud of, or something and how did you accomplish it? So we'd love for you to share that in the chat. While you're typing, Julian, if you can go to the next slide, I'd love to share a little bit more insight into some of the changes we saw specifically. So one, we saw a 30% increase in organizations that conducted internal reviews and climate surveys, which actually moved this from one of the key areas for improvement in 2021 to a common strength in 2022. We also see here what's really interesting is that 25%, about a quarter of organizations, have already improved in communicating their policies or procedures to their staffs. And we've talked about that being a key area for improvement in the year ahead. So the story we're seeing is that about a quarter of organizations have already started on that journey. They've already improved in that area. And this year, we need to help the next 75% move along in that journey in those places as well. Similarly, we see that 19% of individuals who conduct investigations into discrimination and harassment are trained, and that's increased for 19% of organizations, and now we need to bring the other 80% of the network along with us. And so it's great to see that this is kind of a next step some organizations have started on, and now it's work that more of the network needs to do as we all advance in our journeys and take those next steps. Julian, can you go to the next slide? So I want to share one quote from the standard self-assessment report. When you read the report, there are so many quotes throughout it because you gave us such valuable and insightful feedback in your open-ended responses. So I hope you'll take the time to look through the report for that in particular and hear what people are saying about their journeys. But we want to highlight this one that says, we recognize that we are still learning and evolving and no one is an expert. So we rely on trainings and see continuous skill improvements to hold ourselves accountable and continue to be leaders in our community. And this really captures what we're trying to do with the report and at SRE. We know that no one is an expert and no one has arrived at the perfect location where there's no more discrimination, harassment, and everyone is equal and equitable, and there's fully healthy and safe workplaces. That's where we're trying to go. And so it's a real journey of building something together and learning together and sharing as we learn and holding each other accountable. So we wanted to celebrate that. Julian, can you go to the next one? So what's next? The report gave us a lot of insight into the needs of SRE Network member organizations. And based on that data, we're building out how we'll support organizations in the next year. So of course, one-on-one support will continue. If you need support in a specific area you're working on, please reach out to us. We are always happy to help and tailor things to your specific needs. And based on the broader needs of the networks, we're using this information to shape upcoming learning programs and the convening that we hope you'll join us for in June. We're launching new peer learning opportunities to share best practices, support each other, and navigate this work together. One of the real assets of being in a network and a movement to do this work together is that we can support each other and learn from each other and grow together. So we're going to have even more opportunities to do that this year. And we're also developing new resources and working to make our resources more easy to access. So I'd love to ask you a quick question. Are there supports in addition to this list or specific topics you want to see support on that you would like SRE Network to provide that would be helpful? So I welcome you to write that in the chat or to send me an email afterwards if you don't want to share publicly. We are really happy to tailor our needs to what you need. And if anyone is so moved to do so, I also invite you to, unmute and share out loud what you would love to see for support. So I see in the chat, supporting staff while getting the work done. And specific questions about flex and comp time, we can follow up with that offline. But if anyone has anything else they'd like to share, give another moment. Great. I see PTO, DTO, and sabbatical leave policies. So keep them coming. We really want to be responsive to your needs and tailor the work we're doing to best support you. So we always welcome your feedback and would love to continue hearing it. Julian, if you can go to the next slide while people keep writing in the chat. We just want to kind of close on this quote. There's always room to grow and improve. SRE puts us in an accountable relationship with other organizations and allows us to learn their best practices. And that's exactly what we're hoping to do this year and hope comes out of the SSA report. So with that, we're going to move into our Q&A. And it's my privilege to now welcome Anna Marks and Shayna Wasserman. so we can open the floor to hear some of your questions and answer them.
Great. Hi, maybe we can get rid of the slides so everyone can see your beautiful faces. Hi, everyone. I'm Shayna Wasserman. Really glad to be here with all of you. Love all of these questions. And actually, who asked? Beth asked if there are any SRE training specifically for board members. And I put into the chat, we have an incredible resource that Gila put together on boards that we shared, I think, in November or December. It's on our website, and I put it in the chat as well. Let me turn, before in a moment, we're going to transition into some breakout groups where we could discuss with each other. But I have a question for Anna and Samantha, and actually maybe for anyone else that's reading the report. As you were going through the data, what surprised you the most? What stood out for you?
Oh, great question. I don't know what would have surprised me. I suppose that's a better question for Samantha, because I came in as a consultant, but I will say what stood out was that there was a positive change overall, that when we looked at, what were the scores individually for each metric in 2021 and then again in 2022, what we were seeing were small increases in positive response.
Yeah, I think I don't know that it surprised me, but what excited me was, one, in the open-ended responses, just how in-depth individuals were and what they wrote about their strengths and where they want to improve, and the thought that went into that. So we're really excited to learn more about what organizations are really working on the ground. And the other piece I found exciting was that some of the areas that are the most common, growth areas and where most organizations need to improve were also the areas where we saw the most improvement in the last year. And to see that, some organizations have already started kind of on this next phase of their journey, and now it's time for more organizations to come along as well. But to see that work has already been started from, a fifth of the network, and being able to ask questions to those organizations. How did you do it? What did you learn? What can other organizations that now want to take this step learn from what you did?
Great, thank you. If anyone else has a question, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function, or put your question in the chat. There were a few questions or comments about about flex time and PTO, DTO, sabbatical leave policies, and also about SRE trainings. So I know that there are some other organizations that are doing a lot of work around PTO, and I don't know if, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Gila, if you have anything that you can share on that, and Gila, if you also then want to share a little bit about how we determine our trainings and potentially like what's coming down the pike.
I don't have anything particular to share on the PTO piece right now, although I was just yesterday perusing Leading Edge's many different kinds of resources that they have, and I would encourage everybody to go to their site and check them out. But if I do come across something specific, I will share it with the group. Anyone in this session has a particular place for us to look, please put it in the chat. In terms of determining the kinds of training, so if you go on our resource page on the SRE website, we do have already many of our trainings recorded on various issues, but Samantha and I are currently working on developing trainings to address the gaps that we identified in your SSA results, so that people who are sitting here right now with asking, I have the policies, but how do I communicate it to my staff, and other questions like that, we are really working on programming with an eye towards addressing the gaps in the SSA reports. And if there's something specific that you would like to see us develop training on, feel free to reach out to me, and we can have a conversation about that.
Great, thank you. Well, I want to encourage you to keep your questions coming, and we will get back to you. But I think we're going to move on now to some breakout groups, and I'm going to turn it back to Samantha.
Great. Julian, can you share the next slide as I introduce? So for a moment, I just want to remind you of our kind of 4 key standards areas and some of the areas for improvement that were themes within the report. So providing more trainings that are in depth and more frequent, communicating policies and procedures and reporting procedures, updating handbooks, fostering buy-in of lay leaders and board members, providing training to the individuals who conduct the investigations of harassment and discrimination. And we know there is so much more specifics that each organization is working on. So Julian, I'm going to ask you to create 2 breakout rooms. And we're going to go into rooms and I encourage and spend some time learning from each other. So Shayna just put in the chat our prompts. We're going to ask you to introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, organization, and role. And then we're going to talk about any 4 of the standards areas. So, you know, what is one of the areas that you're working on? What are your plans for you know, doing that work in the next couple months? What are the challenges you're navigating in that work? Where could you use support, or is there wisdom from the group that you're looking for that would be helpful as you make your plans for the next few months? So we recommend you start and do a go around and give each person a little bit of time to really share their plans, challenges, and where they could use wisdom and support. And then if you have additional time, open it up for kind of discussion questions. If anyone has a question they'd like to pose for the group and hear some responses, now is the time for that. And if you have time and are so moved, to share a recent success on one of the standards areas. Originally, we were going to break out in the 4 standards areas, but a few people had to hop off earlier. So we're going to break into 2 groups and have some time to connect.